Alright, it is time for my favorite challenge of the year. This is the Reddit Bingo Challenge 2022, and like last year, I'm going to do my TBR for this year challenge, which, if you don't know, runs from April to March of the following year. I'll have the Reddit post and the spreadsheet post down below because I use an interactive spreadsheet for this. And we're going to get into it. I'm going to go through, say my tentative TBR, and give recommendations for hard mode if you are also working on this challenge. It's the first challenge I ever interacted with in the book community. It's, I don't know, really fun because I'm not someone who can usually do the really intense specific prompt readathons in a month or a week because I just don't have those books on hand, but for a full year, it's really fun to plan, and it helps me find books that I wouldn't normally pick up or haven't been prioritizing. I have a wrap-up that I put up earlier this week with some hits and misses in that experience, but I did hard mode, I accomplished the entire bingo board, and that is the goal again this year. So, let's start off with one of the squares. I originally had these in order, and then I got off track, so I have all the prompts written down on my sheet, but they're not in order of the square, so forgive me. But the first one I have written down is a book from the LGBTQAI. There was like a Reddit list, and the hard mode was having read one that had 10 or less votes on that list. And the one I'm going to read is Inda, because it was recommended on my Discord. I don't know a lot about it, but it seems to have a magical school, maybe more sword and sorcery fantasy, and a couple of people I know have actually rated it really highly, and I don't know a lot about it. It seems to be one of those hidden gem sort of books. Now, things I would recommend to you that were on that list that would count: the Founders Trilogy. The last book comes out this year, and it was actually in the 10 or less votes category and has a sapphic romance in it. But more importantly, Catfishing on Catnet was on that list. And if you know me, I used Chaos on Catnet in my wrap-up, so highly recommend the Catnet series for this square as well. Next one is Weird Ecology, so the emphasis having to be a weird world, not very similar to our world. And yeah, on that list, I think the hard mode was you couldn't read by two different authors. I think one was Jeff Vandermeer and one was a different one that I can't pronounce right now. But the one I'm planning to read is either Semiosis or Children of Time. I'm not sure if Children of Time really counts, so I'm more interested in reading Semiosis because it has been on my radar for a really long time, and it for sure meets this prompt. Everyone was recommending it in the subreddit recommendations list, which I'll have that link down below too. There's like a whole place you can go for recommendations if you want to like find things for hard mode and stuff like that. And so those are the ones I'm going to do. For you guys, my recommendations are Chorus of Dragons and Winnowing Flame Trilogy. Both of those are really odd worlds and ecologies, in my opinion. I think it's more obvious in Winnowing Flame, which it starts with Ninth Reign, that this is a weird ecology world. Like there are some odd, gross worm things happening. And the other one, Chorus of Dragons, is a little more subtle. Like, it's definitely really different, especially in terms of races and species and things like that. But also, it's kind of one of those dying earth worlds. So maybe some people would argue this wouldn't count for weird ecology, but I think the fauna and the animal life and the state of the planet is very different from our own. So those are my options that I'll give you guys. Another square is 2 or more authors. Hard mode is 3 or more authors. So last year I wanted to read The Vila. I think I was going to read this for the trans square or something last year, and I never got around to it. And it has, I think, 4 or 5 authors, and a lot of them are some of my favorites. So like River Solomon, Yoon Ha Lee, Becky Chambers. I think they all work on this, plus 2 other authors, I think. I don't know much about this, but I've been wanting to read it, and it works for this prompt. If you just want 2 or more authors, though, like just 2, I don't really, besides like anthologies, which I don't know if those really count for this, I have The Mask of Mirrors. M.A. Carrot is 2 authors. I love that series. So if you don't care about doing hard mode, that is definitely a thing I would check out that has 2 authors. M.A. Carrot is Marie Brennan and Alec Helm, so highly recommend. Now we'll get into historical SFF. I'm going to put the Golem and the Ginny here. The hard mode was it couldn't be, I think, Europe or England. And this, I was told, is more New York City and Middle East. So it fits hard mode, and I have it on my physical TBR, and I've been meaning to read it. My recommendations for you, one is The Conductors by Nicole Glover. This is post-Reconstruction era United States historical fantasy with murder mystery and like a detective couple team. And then I have The Ghost Bride, which takes place in Malaysia, and that one's really awesome. So both of those would work for historical SFF. This next prompt is set in space, and I think the hard mode is it can't be people who were born on Earth that went to space, but they can be descendants of people who were born on Earth, and it primarily needs to take place in space, not on a planet. And I was told Rogue Protocol would work for this in the recommendations thing, so that's currently my pick. I tend to read a lot of sci-fi and space, so even if I'm not actively working towards this prompt, I think it will happen organically. And recommendations for you guys: Escaping Exodus by Nikki Drayden. These are descendants of people from Earth, but they are not people who were born on Earth, and it's all in space, like 100% in space. And then my second one was The Vanished Birds, where the majority of it takes place in space, and all of our characters, except for one, are descendants of humans, but not actual humans that were from Earth. So I think it would actually work really well for this prompt. A lot of the book spends time in space traveling, in my opinion. And I just want more people to read The Vanished Birds. I have a review. You should read it. It's really good. This next one's standalone, and it has to be a standalone that's not on this list. I've already read this one, and this is The Anomaly. It wasn't on that list, but this is a sci-fi thriller, so it definitely works for this prompt. And the ones I have for you guys that weren't on that list, it looked like basically anything by Anna Marie McLemore was not on that list, and they primarily write standalone fantasy. Typically has maybe some fairy tale retelling or magical realism in a contemporary setting sort of vibes. Or, if you want a sci-fi, Goliath by Tochi Onibuchi. All of those were not on the list. Highly recommend. Like Goliath, when you want a meaty book, if you want to challenge yourself, I highly recommend. This next section was an anti-hero, and I think the hard mode was that it should be a YA book, and so people were recommending Iron Widow. I've kind of been wanting to read Iron Widow because of the hype. This seems like a good enough push. Like, this is exactly what this challenge is for me. Like, I want to read books that I typically like have on my radar, but I haven't forced myself to prioritize. It's pretty much Iron Widow. And the one I would recommend to you guys that I think works for this is Renegades by Marissa Meyer. One of our main characters is literally a part of the anti-hero thing. Like, it's heroes versus, anti-heroes. That's the whole point of Renegades. There's Renegades, and then there's, I'm forgetting the name of the other side, but it's like, arch enemies. I think it's arch enemies or something. I don't know. That's the whole point, though, is looking into what is good and evil, etc. in that lens. And then the next one's book club, and I'm not going to give recommendations for this. There's a whole list you can pick from that have been used in book clubs and read-alongs in the past, and the hard modes to participate. And they have a pretty active book club read-along thing, so I'll just point you there. They update, they send out like an email with Goodreads every month, so it's pretty easy to figure that out if you want to do this prompt. And then we have Cool Weapon. This one's really hard. Like, this one I'm hoping I just stumble upon organically. I do have like a plan. But this is hard because it has to be a magical weapon that's held by the protagonist that has a cool name. And I don't know, maybe I just don't read enough sword and sorcery fantasy, but the one I have for myself is Sufficiently Advanced Magic. It was on the hard mode. It's another one of those books that's been on my radar for years. I haven't read lit RPG, so this would also be a good introduction into that space. I was really annoyed because I know books that I've read recently, like in March, that would have worked for this prompt, and I don't know if it will work later on in like the same series. But that means I do have at least two recommendations. One, House of Sky and Breath would work for this prompt, and Ruin of Kings would for sure work for this prompt, and even The Name of All Things would work for this prompt. Revolutions, so this is one where there is a rebellion or revolution. It has to be the main focus of the story. I'm reading Shadows of the Short Days. The whole point of this is protesting the current status quo because it is very prejudiced to other races. Basically, humans look down at other species. There's a lot going on, and they're actually like coordinating a protest at the start of this book. I haven't finished it, but both the front and the back talk about revolution and how that's the focus of it. And, we're definitely working on a protest right now, so I'm feeling pretty confident about it. And in terms of recommendations, I feel like the obvious one is Mistborn: The Final Empire. That's the whole point of the first book, is to plan a heist to revolt against the Lord Ruler. That's the plot. And then the other one that I had written down is Nine Fox Gambit by Yoon Ha Lee. Maybe it's that entire series is about revolution and things like that. So, it's one of my favorite space operas. Couldn't resist not recommending it. So when someone else thought it also worked for this prompt as hard mode in the thread, I was like, well, yeah, this is what I want to recommend to people. Okay, this one's another hard one that's like really stretching me out of my comfort zone, but it's character name in the title and it's first and last name for hard mode. So I guess the only one I could find that I was remotely interested in is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which is, I think, more of like a murder mystery-ish, but weird framing of it. book. No one talks about it because everyone seems to agree that the art of discovery for this book is really fun. I've heard about it for years. It was a very hyped book when I first was watching BookTube. Like, a lot of people were picking it up. It seems like it's a good, like, read this book in a weekend kind of book. But yeah, I was struggling with this prompt. The one that I can recommend that I have read, I read it before BookTube, is The Lies of Locke Lamora. That works for this prompt because Locke Lamora is, I think, the character's name. Now I'm questioning it, but it was also listed as hard mode by other people, and I feel like it's a pretty obvious one. So yeah, that one's a struggle. If you think you have recommendations for this prompt, let me know. And then we are getting into initials, and the initials for hard mode also have to not be for their actual name, but for a pseudonym. And so my recommendation, again, The Mask of Mirrors. M.A. Carrick is not a real person, but there are initials. The one I will be reading is anything by T. Kingfisher, because I believe that was listed as hard mode because the T is not actually related to their actual name. And I think right now I have written down Clockwork Boys, but there's also a new release coming out by them this year, so I could try that. This is an author I'm very interested in. I've read one short story, and I really liked it, and I know a lot of my friends who really like their works, so I'm interested. I'm really interested, so I'm excited that this prompt's really helping me prioritize that goal. The standard book published in 2022 square, and the hard mode is it's a debut. I've already read this. This is Kaikei, and I really liked this book. It is a debut, so I'm also recommending this one. But other ones that I've read this year that were debuts that I liked were How High We Go in the Dark. I didn't love it as much as I loved Kaikei, but it was a debut and it was good. And some things that I've seen going around that I haven't read but people have really loved that's a debut are Legends and Lattes. This one actually just got picked up to be traditionally published too, because it was self-published and then it got enough buzz in the last month to become traditionally published. So those are some options. I mean, the year is still very young. There's a lot of people writing debuts. And now we are going into urban fantasy, and I can't remember what the hard mode was for it. I think the hard mode was that it had to be LGBTQ main character or something like that, based off especially what I've written down. The two that I am trying to decide between are Blackwater Sister and No Gods, No Monsters. These are two that I've seen floating around that I've heard good buzz for, and my recommendations are Cemetery Boys and Jade City. Either one of those, Cemetery Boys is a young adult, Jade City is an adult. Cemetery Boys is contemporary, and Jade City is secondary world, more based in our 80s and 90s city vibes. So I love both of them. I mean, I adore the Greenbone Saga, if you don't know. So those are my recommendations for that. And now this next one is set in an African setting, written by an author of African heritage. And so I have, for myself, I think I want to read either Son of the Storm or Freshwater. Son of the Storm is something that's been on my radar, is something I'm curious about. It might be a fantasy that works for me. I'm hesitant because there are quest elements or travel elements that are not my thing from what I've heard. And then Freshwater, I want to read more by Akwaeke Emezi, but I want to read some of their adult stuff, but I just know that this is a really heavy-hitting literary fantasy work for a lot of people. Another one I want to bring up that I think I'm using this book for a different prompt, but it works for this one, is Half a Lion. This is a self-published book inspired by African tribes. The author is also from Africa, so definitely would recommend that. And the next one is Mental Health, and I think it just had to not be in this blog post, or no, it could have been in the blog post. It just had to not be a Stormlight Archive book, which is very specific, which fine by me. I've already read Stormlight. I'm going to read Planetfall for this. This is another one of those books that has been recommended to me for years, and it will work for this prompt. I'm hoping to love it and read the entire series. I think it's like a series with a bunch of companion novels, but in the same world, and maybe an order kind of matters. But I'm just going to start with the first book, Planetfall, and my recommendation is Do You Dream of Terra 2 by Timey O. This really goes into mental health as an individual, but also when you're put into circumstances that stretch your mental health. I also think it's like a very relatable book considering what we all went through in 2020 and 2021, even with this book being published prior to the pandemic. So it's, I think, a really good mental health focused sci-fi book. And now into award finalists, and the hard mode was it was not nominated for, I think, the Nebula or Hugo. And this worked great for me because someone actually compiled a whole list. Again, just point you to the thread for that if you want to see all of them. But for me, I'm going to read Brown Girl in the Ring by Nalo Hopkinson. That's what I'm going to do. That is my recommendation to you, and I can also just point you towards that list because it's a very comprehensive list. There are so many books on it. I was just excited that one of my 10 books I wanted to read in 2022 was on that list, so I could slot it in here. Next section is BIPOC author, hard mode read, a book by an Indigenous author. For me, it's going to be Fevered Star, which is the second book in the Beneath Earth and Sky series. Is that its name? I don't know, but I'm going to read Fevered Star. It's the second book to Black Sun. And my recommendation to you guys, Love After the End, which is a short story anthology written by a whole bunch of Indigenous authors. I also recommend a Louise Erdrich book. I have it right here. It's a really long name, but it's a dystopian sci-fi. And I haven't read any works by this author, but Stephen Graham Jones is a horror author, so you will definitely get some SFF in that space. Onto the self-published square, and this is where I'm going to use half a line because the trick is to have, well, the hard mode is to have less than 100 ratings, and half a line has less than that, and I do actually have recommendations for this too. Once Stolen has less than 100 ratings and is really great. It's a jungle setting with some sci-fi fantasy tech going on. Your main character is a mer person. A secondary main character is non-binary. They basically have a Emperor's New Groove dynamic of these two people have to travel together, and one is grumpy, one is sunshine. It's not necessarily a romance or anything like that, but it's that type of dynamic as they have to solve this problem. It was awesome. Another one's The Sword in the Street. This is a sword dueling fantasy that's really focused on this messy relationship and how poverty can really push people to their edges, and I really liked this one as well. I read both of these for the self-published indie virtual book fest last summer, and I actually have interviews with these authors on my channel. So both of those books work for this prompt, and I've read them and they're really good, so I highly recommend. And now getting into non-human, I was told that The Galaxy and the Ground Within works for this prompt. So for that reason, I think that's what I'm going to read because it also was just nominated for the Hugo, so that also interests me. And Becky Chambers is someone that I read back in 2019. I think I read A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and I've read their novella, To Be Taught If Fortunate, and I love the novella, and I don't love A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, but I'm hoping that if I read this one, it'll remind me or show me that I was wrong and I do love this, and I can read all the other standalones in that series, so we shall see. And a recommendation that I saw for this is Semiosis, which I'm using for Weird Ecology. I don't know a lot about Semiosis. It just looks really cool. Like, I'm just really interested in it. Just what little I've heard from my friends. Like, I think Rhea from the Bookfinch first put it on my radar, and just like, I've been interested in it ever since. The next square was the Weebly Wobbly Timey Wimey, which I appreciate the Doctor Who reference immensely, and it's really tricky because hard mode is no time travel, which I think I understand what they mean by time travel, but there's just so many cases where I'm like, well, is this time acting weird or is it just weird time travel? But I think for me, the book that'll probably work for this is The Lost Metal by Brandon Sanderson. To be vague with no spoilers, it's just a part of the magic system that he's evolved to mess with time. And it's never like been a huge focus per se, but there are two metals, one that can basically make a pocket bubble that goes faster and one that makes a pocket of time bubble go slower, and I think that counts because it's not about time travel. Ones that I would recommend, the Vanished Birds have time dilation when they're traveling, and then the Hyperion Cantos series, like, for sure has some weird time stuff going on. At least there is some aspect of time travel, but there's enough also weird time going on that I think it counts, because the way these time tombs work, the way that some characters are reacting to certain time entropy qualities, like, even if it has some slight time travel elements, it has enough other weird wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff going on that it should work for hard mode. The next square is also a standard one, short stories. The normal modes read 5 short stories, hard modes read a whole short story collection. I read at least 5 short story collections a year, so this one's usually pretty easy for me. If you want to know any recommendations I have my video from last year where I talk about the short story collections I read last year. And I guess this year I will add on The Paper Menagerie. So good. But yeah, I'll just point you to that video, and I have actually the year before that video too. I read a lot of short story collections, and I usually talk about them at the end of the year, so almost always have a video where I wrap up the short story collections I've read each year. And now into shapeshifters, and it has to have shapeshifters, but the focus is that it can't just have wolves or dogs or something like that be the primary shapeshifter, which is great for me because I just started the Side Changeling series, which I think so far, the first book for sure, it was mainly leopard shapeshifters, and this one I think is a jaguar shapeshifter is our main hero person, again part of like the leopard pack. So I'm using the second book in the Side Changeling for this, but I also recommend Slave to Sensation. And yeah, also Chorus of Dragons, because I love that series, and the shapeshifting that does occur is not like werewolves or anything like that. just to be vague, but there's definitely shape-shifting going on. 2 more squares, no if, ands, or buts is the second to last one that I'm going to talk about, and this is pretty self-explanatory. Don't have those words in the title, and the hard mode's having, I think, 3 or more words. The one I'm choosing for this is Light on Uncommon Stars, but there's also a bunch of others that I have on this list, like Blackwater Sister that I had earlier would work for this. But just similarly to the Becky Chambers book, this other one was just nominated for a Hugo, so I'm interested in it, but also a bunch of my friends have loved it. It's by a non-binary author. It has a lot of things that I'm curious about. It seems like it's going to be a really interesting blend of sci-fi, and I'm curious about it. I think the recommendation I have is Turning Darkness into Light, All Systems Red, and Certain Dark Things. All of these work. They're all very different books. One of them's the start of a series, one of them's a standalone, and then the other one is the last book in a series where I do have my Lady Trent series review. I would not read that on its own without reading the other Lady Trent books. I think that'd be a weird experience. I don't think that'd be as fulfilling. And then the last square I'll talk about is Family Matter. You need to have 3 generations of a family. I don't know what I'm choosing for this. I think I am hoping one of the last 2 Chorus of Dragons books works for this, because so far every other Chorus of Dragons book has worked for this. Like, family drama is big in Chorus of Dragons, and it's messy. And yeah, you typically do have 3 to 4 generations of people at any given point, depending on how you're even looking at the family tree. And then my recommendation, Greenbone Saga, for sure, works for this. A lot of books that I read also work for this. Like I just read Kaikei, so like that should work for this. But yeah, those are my recommendations, my tentative TBR. Like previous years, I'm sure it'll shift and adjust as I read books that I don't know work for prompts, but they suddenly do. Are you doing the Reddit bingo board? Let me know. We definitely chat about it all the time in the Discord. It's just one of my favorite yearly challenges, and it definitely gets me out of my comfort zone and prioritizing things that weren't being prioritized. And if you want to leave an emoji, leave either a leopard or a dragon. I feel like those are the animals I've talked about the most in the video. And if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.